methodology, and at the end of the day, it's have your idea, figure out who wants that idea, and go talk to lots of people, like 50 or 60 or more, before you spend any money. And this is a perfect exercise when you're in college, because if you have a midterm or something else, it can wait, and then when you have time again, you get back into it. So that's sort of at the core, and I think Williams, I will be honest, is behind the ball on entrepreneurship. If you look at the schools we compete with, which for me is not Amherst, but it's more the Ivy League schools, they are just going crazy with entrepreneurship. So I hope we get more of it here. I think we could get 30 or 40% of the students sticking their toe into entrepreneurship. And at the tail end, there'll be a few who are going to start their own business while they're in school, no matter what I say, which is great. But it's a lot of fun, very rewarding, and I really enjoy it. So I'm thrilled to see how many people are here today, and I think it's only going to get more going forward. So, all right, let's get going. We've got some fresh blood here. So why don't we just start? Why don't you each introduce yourself? And I think start by sort of your college career a little bit, some of the things you were involved with here, and how you got to where you are now.
Hello. Alrighty. Hello everyone. I'm Guedis, class of 15. I'm gonna give you a quick glimpse of what I've done. I'm gonna start with Williams. I was the one that kind of joined every club the first week or so, all the dance clubs, Wolf, Crew, and then like 2 weeks after, I stopped all of them all. But I kept the friendships. But I realized that was a lot of time. There was a dance club that wanted to practice at 11 o'clock at night. Once I learned that, I'm like, maybe not. But it was a cool people. But in any case, majored in comp sci, back when the major was like 15, 20 people max. You're trying to get people into the door. Now it looks like it's very oversubscribed, 100 people, 200. So hopefully that's all gets better. I essentially consider myself a technologist. What that really means is using technology in business for social good. That's something very near and dear to me because I came from very humble beginnings. I wouldn't be here without the help of others, and that really influences the way I view life. In terms of roles, product manager roles, software engineering roles, entrepreneurship roles, one of my favorite ones is actually Chief, which kudos to Brad and Ben from the primary ventures. They were one of the first believers in Chief. For those that don't know Chief, it's one of the fastest women-founded unicorns in history, and Chief is really a community for women leaders. What I really like about them is that they can prove that you can have a good business, but also have a very mission-driven company, have good culture. Outside of that, big fan of how do we make mentorship more accessible to all? It's something that some people may have it loosely, it's everywhere, it's abundant, other people may not have that. And how do we do that? And also on the side, also building SOMOS, which is this health tech, consumer health app on it's really a holistic health GPS. How do we make it as easy as possible for you to improve your holistic health? Because there's different dimensions, using a lot of data, a lot of model, and so forth. And here's Jason.
Great. Thanks everyone for this.
I think you better use.
How about now?
Yeah.
Is that on? Okay, great. So we were actually in the same computer science. We overlapped out of the same classes. I was computer science and military history. Those were my two majors. It's not an official major, but my professor said I could say that. So, and yeah, I had a kind of a random upbringing, living all over the world, different places. But came here, and it was the summer right before senior year, had an idea for a company called Tidy, where the idea was, hey, let's help people clean up their desktops. They've got way too much stuff on their desktops, let's help them clean it up. And it was built for my mom originally, and I just started building it in Xcode. And it kind of worked. It was a little bit janky, but it worked well enough. And so we said with a couple of friends, hey, why don't we take this to the Williams Business Plan competition, which was I think the third year at that point. It was exciting. We did the business plan canvas. We did all the things that you'll do in this program, and it really took off because a lot of people really liked the idea. There's a lot of value in cleaning up your digital life, especially back then. And it's when everyone started to have Dropbox and Google Drive, Trello, all these different things. So long story short, we raised some money from some alumni from that competition. They came up to us after the presentations and said, hey, I wanted to deploy this at my company, let me invest. So that was a really amazing experience. We took that, we raised $500,000, moved to Boston, expanded the idea to become meta search, where the idea was, hey, let's search across everything you have, make it as easy as Google to find your files. We moved to Boston. It worked pretty well. We had a lot of users, a lot of excited users, but none of them wanted to pay, so we ran into all kinds of problems there. And we decided to switch over to enterprise as our customer base, and it worked. It didn't work fast enough, so we actually merged with another company that was in that space already, in the AI space, and long story short, took that company, went to a bunch of financial services firms, got a bunch of customers there, and eventually in 2019, that company was acquired by Salesforce. So it was a long journey, but it worked out. We got very lucky along the way. Yeah, that's the quick overview. But now I work as a product manager at Salesforce, and I'm not quite sure what that means, but because I have no classical product management training, but I'm figuring it out every day, and I'd love to help everyone here realize that there are lots of really cool jobs in tech that I never thought of, were never showed to me in my time here, and I'm happy to be a resource to help people onboard into tech.
Perfect. We want to talk a little bit about product management in this session. So maybe could each of you talk about what is product management as you see it, and what are some of the key things that excite you about doing it, and some of the challenges that you have in product management?
To me, I think product management is finding a product with a market that is a good business opportunity, and then plugging all the pieces together to make that into a business, a line of business with a big company or just a single business as a startup. Finding where's there a market that I can deploy some product that can be monetized for the gain of the company. And there's a lot that goes into that, but really you're doing a lot of coordination of different teams. There's engineering you're working with design, you're working with all these different facets within the larger, within a tech company or within a startup to help move it forward. So whatever it takes to move that product from initial design, talking to users, iterating, and then actually deploying it for customers.
Yes, I'll echo a lot of that. And I will say before I forget, for those that are curious about product management, the way people get into it's quite fascinating, but also could be improved. Either it's like during an internship, right out of college, or it's like many years after college. So for those that are in this space right now, I would look into rotational product manager roles. Sometimes they're called APM roles, associate product manager roles, because what you will find is sometimes people do want to enter the space, but they either require like that gap. And so those are so many cool roles out there, so put those on your radar right now just to start looking at them, because if you miss that window, it's still doable, but it's a little harder. You got to kind of enter through the back door, not through the front door anymore. But similar to Jason, for me really product management is, I'll talk more about why I find it interesting, and it's kind of working at the intersection of different fields, disciplines, having the engineering skill set, or mindset, the product mindset, the business mindset, user mindset, data mindset. It's managing all the different interconnections and webs. So you really want to be at the hub of it all. And you can ask this to so many different people, everyone has a different interpretation. I think that's what also is the vagueness of it. And it's one of those things where it also depends on what kind of organization. Big tech product management is different from like startup product management, based on early stage product management versus like later stage product management. It's so varied, but just kind of really to me what's fascinating is at the end you're just taking something from idea to reality and iterating on that so it can add value to both the users but also the business so you can be sustainable with that.
And one thing just to quickly add, I just realized this is actually, what's pretty cool about product management is it's something that you could do here at college pretty easily, right? If you're either a group leader in a project, pulling together a big team to do well on a project, or that visionary who's making it all happen, or if you start something for your friends, right? Start something, a little website here, or some blog, or something, you can have that same experience of taking something from nothing to something in your current roles as college students.
So when, Jason, when you were a founder, you were a product manager and had to do everything else to keep the company going. Now you're in a huge organization. How is it different?
Well, a lot of ways. basically a completely different job. But the good news is we are still a team within a larger organization, so our whole team is still here, the original team from the acquisition, which is not usual, but we have still our core group here. The big difference is that instead of getting, Salesforce is an enterprise software company, instead of getting out there and being really hands-on with users, it's much more looking at macro trends of, what does Gartner say is a really important industry that's going to be growing 10x in the next 5 years, and then building something specifically for that space. It's more of trying to meet a business's need instead of building something awesome for consumers. So that's the big difference. I mean, that's mostly just consumer versus enterprise, but also there's such a time lag at a bigger company of actually getting something out the door. You're planning many releases out, and you can only make small changes each release, whereas as a startup, so Aaron Taylor in the crowd, he was the engineering lead throughout the whole journey for another founder of Meta. And back in the day at Meta, I could go to Aaron and say, hey, let's push this to production right now, and we could do it, and improve the user experience. We could iterate very quickly versus at Salesforce it takes quarters.
Yeah. How big is your firm?
We're like 10, like 5 people, and that's what's neat. I think you'll find that you have like an inkling or an inclination of which one you kind of prefer, and then you start with one, and then you can try the rest. I feel like when I was at Williams, and even when I first started product manager, software engineering, like this had to be my permanent thing for the next X number of years. And then I realized, like, why am I constraining myself so prematurely when I could change my mind? I could explore this other path, and I could try that, and if it turns out it wasn't what I expected, I could boomerang back. But for me, I find my product management style is very working closely with users, and then also iterating quickly on the prototypes, really figuring out retention, the user experience, and I think about that a lot. I will say I'm not as inclined about thinking like the bigger macro parts, more like enterprise, and more consumer focused kind of product manager. But thankfully that's where you kind of like other team members who like to think about those stuff as well.
In developing new products, I'm assuming you, or I don't know if you do, but do you use the minimum viable product and sort of this iteration process? Could you talk a little bit about that iteration process in your software products and what you're looking for, how you incorporate those changes in that whole process?
I'm personally a big fan, and we are about, it's not only prototyping, but if you go a little rewinding, it's prototyping. It's a great book. Reach out and send me the PDF if you Google it, it's out there. But it's really how to test some idea cheaply as quickly as possible, having some hypothesis where you're trying to gain from this, trying to really disprove yourself wrong as quickly as possible. And then figuring out how do you prototype this through minimal code, whether it's no code or just enough code, just enough design, where you can really iterate faster, because that is a bit more expensive, that is a bit more time heavy. I mean, I like to deal with both worlds, but I think one of my favorite ones was at one point we were thinking about this AI tool. We wanted, like, before we wanted to go and like build a model, train a model, and so forth, we're like, behind the scenes, I'm gonna act as that quote unquote AI. They're gonna send an input, but behind the scenes, it's actually me doing some of the stuff behind the scenes. And I'm probably one of the better AI models I could get. Right? It turns out they actually didn't want some of the AI features we were thinking about, but this easily saved us months, a whole bunch of time and money of trying to build out something that would have been too over-engineered for what people really wanted. And I think prototyping, it's really fun. It's just, yeah. Before I go on that whole tangent, I'll leave it there.
For me, I think the most important thing is two big misconceptions that I had starting out. I thought ideas were everything, and oh my god, I can sell this idea to Apple for millions of dollars. It'll be so awesome. I just got to keep it secret and then write to Steve Jobs, or whatever. That was when I was very young. That was the way I thought about it. And so Jeffrey Thomas in the crowd here will know that I was always trying to get NDAs signed, and oh my god, we got to be very secret about this. I realized that's a big mistake, because you want to get that idea out there so it can get owned as quickly as possible, and people can tell you all the reasons that it's terrible, and you can quickly iterate it. And the likelihood that someone else is going to take your idea and build it is extremely slim, and even if they could do that, they will, right? So it's not like you're helping yourself very much. So getting out there and talking to as many people about your idea as quickly as possible is something that's really important. And also, yeah, just making sure that you're, like you said, not waiting for it to be perfect. We were always, hey, we're close to launch, but we don't want anyone to try it before we launch because it's going to be so awesome once we build this XYZ thing. If a lot of companies wait too long to actually get their idea or their product out there, when really, even in its worst form, you should get it out, because if no one likes it in that form, they're not likely to like it when it's perfect. Because if you can, the minimum viable product thing is very real. If you could solve a problem even with the worst UI and the worst experience and the crappiest product, if you could solve their problem, people will still use it and likely pay for it. And you can optimize it from there, but you really want to make sure you get to someone wanting to pay for your thing now.
To add one thing there as well. Thankfully now they've kind of changed the narrative about this idea. It doesn't have to be perfect anymore. Now it's called like product-led growth, it's called building in public, where it's kind of changed the narrative that it's probably going to be buggy, it might not be the best, but getting it and building alongside your users and they feel engaged and interested and that they are taking part. Like we've seen, there's a lot of great companies taking that approach and they're growing fairly quick in terms of just the product features, the product delivery and all of that.
Excellent. So how would someone, college student, thinking, wow, product management sounds great, and I will say that liberal arts education is an excellent background for product management. What are some strategies and ways in which they can break in to get there?
So a couple of things that I would say. One is get involved and start networking as soon as possible. Everyone who's in the room, great job, right? That's the first step. Show up and actually have conversations. You'd be surprised how many alumni are willing or would love to have conversations with you. And you know, just use the Williams Rolodex and just reach out to as many people as possible. However, when you do that, don't just say, hey, I'd like to have a job in Boston, please. The way you do it is you have a project or something interesting that you can bring to the table. Like I think it was said earlier, we also want to have good conversations when we're helping in that mentorship role. And someone's so much more likely to help if you come with an idea or some kind of spin or some project. That's why one of the things that I recommend to most students is start doing things outside of regular classwork, whether it's a little hobby project or building a website or doing something, because having something, it helps for two reasons. One, it's a really good tool to help catalyze networking conversations, and it's also a really strong way to have, when you're interviewing for a company, to have stuff to talk about that's not just school. It goes a really long way because it shows that you're excited and interested in something to pick it up outside of your day-to-day. For example, when I started Meta, I aggressively reached out to hundreds of different alumni in the Boston area, in the tech space, and I said, somebody recommended that you would be an awesome person to talk to in this space because I have this company, and everyone responded. Everyone was incredibly helpful. It helped me build a really strong network, and we wouldn't have been able to do anything that we did without that network, but it was because there was the catalyst of this idea, this cool thing that we were working on, that showed I was excited, and it was that everyone would love to have a conversation with an exciting student and help them.
Definitely snaps to that. I'll also say a few things. One, start building this idea of product sense. What that really means is thinking about products that you use every day, whether it's your apps on your phone, your at school, any kind of apps, website. Just start thinking about it, like, why are you using it? What don't you like about it? But despite that, you still use it. What is going well? What could be better? And just start, like, little things, just doing it, and you start to realize, like, wow, this is why I like this app. It just feels much better, but it's no longer feeling, like it's a bit more quantified now. Or it could still be a feeling. So developing that product sense of all the stuff that you're constantly using, and that helps build this, like, bank of intuition, really. We're building intuition. Then with that, think about building stuff, as Jason recommended. Like, what's good about product manager or any kind of role, like, it doesn't have to be you don't have to wait for it for you. Like, you can trailblaze your own path, you can start doing it in whatever way. Big capacity, small capacity. Similarly, getting in the various rooms available. I think due to the COVID pandemic, a lot of communities were very physical. You often have to go to meetups. They were concentrated at certain companies, certain environments. Now, due to also different mega trends, but there are online communities, there's Discord communities, there are Slack communities, there's so many out there that are having these micro conversations. But it's important to be part, you don't have to be part of the conversation, you can just be a fly in the room of those conversations. Join the various types of communities based on the industries they're interested in, based on the types of products, their passions. There's so many, because what you'll find there is then you start being able to meet other folks who may be a potential collaborator, maybe a potential user, maybe a potential, it could be investor, maybe a potential advisor, mentor. And to your point, it just really makes you interesting. So you can have these things and you can have these conversations. And of course the APM, RPM programs, and a few other things.
I mean, eventually a product manager has to really know the industry, get a certain level of expertise in the industry. Let's talk a little bit about your abilities now to innovate and how you, what happens when you get an idea for a product and what is the process you go through in your organizations now to get some traction on it?
For me, I've pretty much been working on the same thing for a very long time, so there hasn't been much outside of that. I guess since I graduated, or I guess we even incorporated the company before we graduated, but ever since then it's been one very long journey. There haven't been much ideas outside of that along the way. But I mean, the best ideas come when you're actually talking to customers or other people about your idea and asking them to be critical, because that's usually the most helpful thing you get is critical feedback.
I think adding to that, I will suggest this great article series. Lenny runs this popular product newsletter, 6-part series. Happy to forward it to you so you can pass it on to the rest of the club. It goes into more breadth and detail about just all the various products, and I don't want to reiterate a lot of these points because they are fairly popular and a lot of people leave it, but I will say it's really removing your ego. I think that was one thing I had to learn about, so like removing the ego. The fact that at first point I didn't want to ask people like, or to approach people because they're like, oh no, if they don't like it or if it's not working out, like it's a me thing, like they don't like me. And once I realized like it's not me that they don't like, it's just the product, the experience, it's not really solving what I want, what they're really looking to solve. That was such liberating because I no longer had to feel that fear or shame that it was a me thing. It's not a me thing, it's just an experience thing. It's just a thing that could be fixable and solvable. And that's one key thing. The other thing is trying that curiosity. I'd say there is so many tools out there, there's so many new products coming out constantly, services. Following that curiosity to see where is that going to lead you. Like I remember there was this neurotech device you could put on your head. I was going to bring it, but I forgot. But essentially it turns your brainwaves into an API. I wanted to build this tooling on top of it so people who are handicapped motorly, they could operate a computer. Didn't work out, far more complex than I thought. But the people I met through there eventually gave me some good hardware knowledge and insight for later on for some of the other products I'm kind of like tinkering on and we're trying to innovate. So you can just follow those threads of curiosity. In the end, no one's kind of measuring you. There's no report card other than I guess the GPA stuff. But other than that, there's no report card for you in your life. And if you can create your own report card, the better, because I think so much goes into all these things that I was self-limiting myself most of the time until I realized, why am I thinking so much, overthinking things?
You guys are still relatively recent grads, so you can think your way maybe back to Williams. Here we are trying to grow the programming of entrepreneurship. What sort of things would you have liked to see while you were a student? What do you think we should be thinking about? What sort of activities should we be focusing on here at Williams to foster the creative thinking process?
I think one cool thing that I do credit, I remember back in sophomore year, maybe junior year, I remember, but it was some social entrepreneurship winter study course. There wasn't much going on around that time, but I remember taking it with Jeffrey, met a lot of great people who all of them themselves from that course actually are doing fantastic things as co-founders, as operators, and so forth. But I do think there's something special about creating spaces, even momentarily for a day or two, to build and to create. And whether some people call them hackathons, I've helped organize major hackathons before. Hackathon I think is a misnomer. It's really just getting people to create on something. It could be as a prototype, it could be ideas. I remember when we were at, we had like a hackathon as part of the social entrepreneurship course. It was through stickies, we had presentations. We kind of ran through the whole like traditional process. But it was such an exhilarating time because at that time it either reinforced you like this building process, this whole like creation process, or it was maybe your first time experiencing it. It was one of my first times, like, whoa, this is actually quite contagious and energizing. So more opportunities to build and create. The goal really shouldn't be like building the next big business, it's just to let that curiosity to be a playground to build on those various skill sets, to put in those reps, like at a gym. The other piece is, I think with those, trying to also get other people from the campus. I think one thing I realized, how many other people I've met who are operators or founders or entrepreneurs or product managers who didn't study comp sci in school, they went from maybe starting poetry, they did music, they did dance, and many credit that they just didn't have a space on campus to explore these things. They often thought these things were gated, like you needed to be a business expert to be part of this club, or you needed to have a big skill set already, or you needed to have like some predefined knowledge, and they self-exclude themselves out. And I think there's a great opportunity to really change that narrative. Like anyone of any kind of interest, regardless of experience, come. We'll teach you enough. You'll learn as you go. Last thing is, I'll come back to this. I'll think of it somewhere.
Yeah. So what I would say, one thing that could be done is bringing in recent grads that are doing things in tech to connect with, because then it becomes, for students, it's not just a fun entrepreneurship thing, it's also a networking opportunity to get tech leads, basically, of like people who can help you in the tech space. So helping make that connection, because the people are out there, they want to help, but it's hard to make that link up. And also, this is just an idea, but maybe something around like ideas or so the same way that venture capital companies sometimes hatch ideas and then build a team around it to build something. It could be kind of an interesting idea to have some set piece ideas or cool projects or an app for this that you could assemble a team around. So if someone doesn't have the next great idea and is doesn't feel like they have the most exciting concept or whatever, they can still have the experience of working on something with a team and get those skills of building a project, something they can talk about without having to have the spark first.
Excellent.
Can I have one more thing there? I think also, however big the club is or however it's growing, having some kind of structured serendipity. By that I mean for people to meet each other at a deeper level. I think some people may know each other as friends, as co-athletes and so forth, but I think there's a great opportunity to also go a little deeper on why are they interested in these things, what kind of spaces are they interested in right now. It'll probably change with time, but I think some of these relationships, you can kind of trust everyone's going to go and do great things in some shape or form, but at this time when people are just so energized and curious and bold thinking, to start forming those at a deeper level, and again, there's some cool techniques of how to do that more manageably. But I want to say, not leaving it up to pure serendipity based on who you know already or what class you're in, or you just happen to bump into them. I think there's a way to create some structure so that at least there's a more cohesive community, so that going forward, wherever everyone goes, you can rely to that.
Wonderful. Let me open it up to the audience. If anyone has some questions.
So first, I spoke with Allan. I actually work with him. He couldn't find childcare, and so he apologizes that he couldn't make it here. But dealing with a lot of developers building products at Data Art, I really see how a lot of these developers are going to 10x with like a GitHub Copilot or an AI tool. How does that change the dynamic for founders? What principles does it reinforce? I feel like we can build a lot more things a lot more quickly.
Good, I could take it first. One thing that's interesting is with developers, so I do product management, but I still also do a lot of coding on the side as well, is seeing that gap of when to like use Copilot and use all these tools. Like I think they're going to be more important, they're going to be more prevalent, it's going to be like an additional, here kind of, Copilot's a great name, so I'm not going to belabor that. But it's knowing like how the developer knows to use it and when it actually does fall, when it's not perfect, and being able to work around that. But then at the same time, how like what are you really building and who are you building it for? It kind of comes back to the qualitative aspects of like, yes, now you can build a product, but is this really what you're looking for, or is it not, and for what reasons, how is it sustainable, and so forth. But I will say, I think going forward, you're gonna find, even right now, like for those that are developers or even non-developers, like to start really experimenting with these tools. For the most part, they have a free or free enough premium to start seeing how they use. There's so many, and whether it's from not to say you have to use them for homework, because that's a whole other issue, but for like your side projects, and just to see like where are the faults right now. But you'll find that they're so accessible, and you're gonna actually see for yourself like this is when I can use it, this is when I can't use it. But that also allows you to have these conversations because developers are actually gonna have the same context, but in terms of the coding realm.
Yeah, I'm a little more skeptical of a lot of those tools. I think they'll help with some of the more grinding exercises in development, but when it comes to building a process, working with the rest of your team, coming up with ideas, solutions for bugs, I think it's the generative technology is a long way off from replacing or even augmenting people in those types of situations, which is most of where the interesting stuff happens. So I think it's pretty exciting, but I think it'll help mostly with the execution phases and not any of the planning or ideation phases, at least as I've seen it so far, especially specifically for development.
We have time for one more question.
This is for Jason in specific. I know, Jason, you said you reached out to 100 plus alumni in the Boston area.
Yeah.
So then first, how did you do that? Was that just through the alumni network, through the website, the
Yep.
database?
Yep.
And then two, what did you ask these alumni? What was a good targeted question to get them to talk about your product?
Yeah, so it was right at the time where we had started a company, so that was the framing was, we just raised X amount of money for this exciting company that does XYZ, here's a quick video. We really, really need help, you're in this space, can we set up some time to figure out how you might be able to help us? It was pretty simple, that was it. And yeah, I used the website to go through and find people that were in the tech space, startups, early stage, tech adjacent, venture capital people, and that's what I did at the time, yeah, and it was very, very effective. But specifically because it wasn't, hey, can I have a job please? It was, hey, I really have an exciting problem here. It's my first time ever. I just graduated and now we have all this money we need to deploy for this exciting company. How can you help us with that? And really got a lot of people excited.
Misha, could you share your experience when you went out with 100 emails?
Sure. Similarly, Jason, I personally reached out to hundreds, but if not thousands of alumni